Hello and welcome to our kitchen table. I'm sitting here with my wife, your therapist, and today we're going to be talking about what is the difference between high quality therapy and therapy that you need to watch out for. Well, because it's hard to tell if you're just a client sitting with the therapist. How can you determine if this therapist is really doing a good job?
Yeah, is this going to be helpful long term?
Yeah. So my name is Price, and I married your therapist.
Hello, I'm Ash, and I'm your therapist. Please keep in mind that even though this is a podcast about mental health and therapy, that it's not the same thing as or a replacement for therapy. And if you're watching the video, this is Alice.
Say hi, Alice.
She'll continue saying hi.
She really makes herself known around here.
She does. It's her favorite day of the week.
So I am excited to get into this, but we have a few announcements that I want to cover really quickly.
Okay.
Or not even announcements, just a few things I want to cover. As I have said before on this podcast, the intro music, the music that plays at the intro and the outro of the podcast, I made that music.
Yeah.
That's my song. That's original composition.
We've gotten compliments on it.
No, really? Okay. Well, that is excellent news because we have fans now. And it's getting to my head. It's obviously getting to my head.
Obviously.
But we have people reaching out telling us that, wow, I love the podcast. You guys are doing a great job, that sort of thing. I want everyone to know, and this is the last time I'm going to say this. I'm never saying this again. I made this podcast. This podcast exists to get my music production career off the ground. So if you're a real fan, you'll let me know that you love this song.
When you make it big for your music, are you going to quit the podcast?
No, I think I'll do the podcast. It's like paying my dues.
Oh, yeah. It's grown on you now.
Yeah, but I'll know that people really listen to this podcast if they tell me, yeah, I love your podcast, but I really love that song at the beginning.
Here for the music. Yeah, tune in for that.
See, what I've actually done is made it impossible for somebody to genuinely compliment the song.
Right, now you'll never know.
Yeah, and I think that's probably good for my ego.
That is good for you.
We are so blessed by the kind words that we're receiving, whether it's on social media or on iTunes reviews. It gives us a lot of energy to keep doing this.
Oh, yeah. Every time you and I have a conversation about the podcast, we come back to the listener. Like, who are our listeners and what do they need? What's beneficial for them? Is this a good decision for them? And it's so cool to start hearing back from people and to be getting that feedback and people enjoying or people having questions. And yeah, I love that.
It's very exciting, and we love hearing those kind words, and it makes us feel like we're on the right track. And I want to invite anybody listening to contact us if they have something that they would like for us to talk about, or if you have a question, if you have a topic, if you have an issue that's on your mind. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to talk about it.
Yeah, my hope for the podcast, again, is that we're getting connected to people who have questions about therapy or about mental health, about a topic like that, and to get to answer those questions directly, to give people direct access to a therapist. So
we're not running out of stuff to talk about by any means, but we'd love to be specifically helpful to folks, because that is ultimately the objective.
Absolutely. Is very much listener-driven content so that it's as useful to you as possible.
Yeah. Find us on TikTok, Instagram, I Married Your Therapist. Email us at imarriedyourtherapist@gmail.com. Love to hear from you there. We also just started a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Something that's very exciting about starting a new social media channel is like we have like 5 subscribers.
And it's amazing.
Every time we get a new subscriber, I'm like, oh my God, we got a new subscriber. It's like really fun. I like it a lot. I like starting something new like that. So we're now, if you're listening to this, but you'd rather be watching this, we're posting I'm not doing a lot of editing on it, but we are posting the videos onto YouTube now.
Good luck to us.
Yeah. You and I spent 10 years off social media. And now we're very much on social media. It's very bizarre. Very bizarre to me. Okay. With that out of the way, thanks for letting me do my little diatribe
on with the podcast.
On with the show. Again, we're kind of boiling this down to what is good therapy? What does that mean when your therapist is really doing a good job? Because sometimes good therapy is uncomfortable. sometimes it feels bad or
Yeah,
it can
sure.
feel challenging, you know?
Well, especially if you've been avoiding feeling stuff, to start feeling stuff, that's very uncomfortable.
That's such a good point. Yeah. So, like, how do we tell if therapy is good? Because I've gotten out of sessions that ultimately really challenged me and really pushed me to like a healthier place that did not feel good like during or immediately after.
Yeah.
At the same time, how do you distinguish between your own discomfort and then a therapist who's like not doing a good job, not acting in good faith? How do we do? Not that there's like a bunch of therapists out there who are out to get you, but how do we parse out the difference? Because we're trying to be discerning. We're trying to trust a professional.
Yeah.
You know, to go outside of our own comfort zone. It's difficult to know where the line is there.
Yep.
So that's what I want to talk about today.
Okay. That sounds good.
So the first thing that comes to my mind, because you and I have talked about this off and on for a few weeks, this has kind of been like stewing for me for a while. And one of the things that you keep bringing up is that therapy is very private, naturally.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
Well, obviously it's confidential. So
Yeah,
the
completely.
things that you're sharing in therapy are completely confidential. Those are never being shared outside of therapy. And so that's one reason that it's private. But the other thing is that there's not a lot of access to other therapy, even for other counselors. So going through school, something that we kept asking as students is, I really want to watch other therapy sessions. Like maybe there's some like YouTube demonstration of actors pretending to do this. Or we, as students who don't know anything about counseling, are role playing. But
I remember you getting home from those classes where you would like role play.
Oh my
an
gosh. I
alcoholic
thought I was
or-
going to puke every time I had to do a role
Really?
play. I hated doing them. They honestly went really, really well. Like it was a good experience, but leading up to them, I would be so anxious all night. But again, there's nothing to go off of that. Maybe we're seeing these little clips. Maybe your teacher's sharing what's happening, kind of how they think about therapy, but really not. You're maybe reading like a made up excerpt in a book of like, a 2-page conversation.
Right.
Again, a made up excerpt, but you're not like really seeing that. And so we were talking through getting through school and we're like, I really just want to watch somebody do this. Now, when I got to my internship, I did get to watch 3 sessions. There were 3 counselors, and with permission from the client, I got to sit in on 3 sessions. And that was amazing. On one hand, it was so affirming to the things that I was doing. And on the other hand, I learned a lot. I learned a lot of good language to use. And thankfully, I had a job before I was a therapist where I was getting to sit in a room with clients in a mental health setting. So I knew some of that, but
This was when you were a sexual assault victim advocate.
yes.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. So even though it wasn't therapy, I knew what it was to like sit in the room with somebody who was going through a tough time and to be present with them. So that was great. And we have skills classes where we practice skills on each other. We each pretend to be a client. We practice skills. But again, you're not really seeing it. So I got to see it during my internship 3 times.
The internship, just for everybody to be aware, is a requirement of the becoming a therapist process. You have to conduct an internship.
With my license and in the state of North Carolina, while we're in school, we have to get so many hours, several hundred hours of like being in the room with clients.
But you're practicing with them directly, right? So you're not observing a more experienced therapist conduct a session.
Yeah.
You're basically thrown in and immediately you are somebody's therapist, even as an intern.
Yeah.
And you're telling me that throughout that several month process, you only saw 3 other sessions that were conducted by somebody else.
Yep. I saw 3 sessions and I had already had practicum, which is like mini internship before internship, just fewer hours. I'm still doing counseling and I had never sat in the room with anybody. So there are some like things in place to help people. We like bring videos in of ourselves. We've recorded a session with the client's permission and we're playing clips of that or a whole thing of that in class or with our different supervisors because we have supervisors at our site, supervisors in class. And we're getting feedback, but wouldn't you want, I wanted like hundreds of hours of watching other counselors. I wanted access to somebody's whole counseling career, and I wanted to learn everything that they did in the room. And I feel like that should happen. I feel like that would be beneficial, but it's so private that on one hand, even as a counselor, we don't really have access to what happens in other counselors' rooms.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there are some ways. There are certain trainings where maybe they do that, but it all feels so limited to me. And it also means that as a client, you're not seeing somebody else's sessions. Unless your friend's telling you, here's kind of what therapy is like, and it's their own interpretation with their own therapist, you're probably not hearing what counseling is like.
So the reality for the rest of us is that we could go to a therapist. We could hear that therapy is great, and then go to a therapist who is not a good therapist or not a good therapist for us.
Yeah.
And never really know that therapy is very different.
Yeah.
The way that therapy is conducted is very different from therapist to therapist.
It's very different from therapist to therapist.
Especially because of the confidential nature of therapy inherent to the practice means that this therapists are not exposed to each other's work very much.
And I want to be clear, like in school, in some programs, they're doing much more, I think like training where you have a professional sitting there in the room or watching or listening or something.
Right.
Some programs even provide like live feedback from a professional. But they handle it differently. That said, I mean, there are a lot of things that stay the same. So even when I sat in with other therapists, because we've broken down what sessions are like, because we've practiced that introduction, because we've talked through certain things, I never sat in the room with somebody and I was like, I haven't been doing therapy, you know?
Right.
I never sat in the room and I was like, this is so different from what's happening. It's not the same thing.
Sure.
But man, it can just be so different. And especially the content when you're really getting into stuff. Again, the access can be so limited. And I know in school, again, our regular concern was like, I want to see more of this. And even as a student who's supposed to be going into this as a career, we're not seeing more.
If you want a co-pilot for your life, which is what a therapist could be, you could draw that equation. You want to know that person has got a lot of hours in the air with another trainer,
Yeah.
Because it's like you get a lot of classroom time, you get a lot of time in the what's the machine? I'm completely blanking on
where we're doing role playing.
No, where a pilot is practicing like in a machine.
Oh yeah, flight simulator.
Thank you, flight simulator. Yeah, you're getting a lot of like technical knowledge, but I think that a lot of experienced pilots would tell you that it just doesn't beat being in the air with somebody with a lot of experience and getting that hands-on in the room, because you can learn about these things conceptually all day long, but it's another thing to be like in the room with a client working through issues, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you are kind of thrown in the deep end as a therapist when you go through that training.
It really feels like that. It feels like you're just thrown out. And again, different counselors are going to have different experiences, and there are a lot of safety nets to make sure you don't just sit down in front of somebody who, has no idea what they're doing. I don't want to scare people. I don't want people to hear this and go, oh my God, counselors have no idea what they're doing. No, it's hundreds of hours of supervised stuff. After that, it's thousands of hours of supervised counseling. School is really, really intensive, and we're breaking down so many things. But just in terms of what is it like to sit in the room with somebody, that feels almost unanswerable.
Because that is so confidential. Mm-hmm. It's so private.
Which is great. It's great that that's private. But yeah, it's
that's
private.
That's the consequence of it being that private. And I think that it's interesting. Let's enter price speculation time right now.
Okay.
This is just wild speculation on my part. But I think it stems from a culture that views therapy as deeply shameful. That, you can't even identify the names of the people that are seeing you.
Right.
You can provide no identifying information in any way. If you saw a client out on the street that you've been seeing for years, you wouldn't even say hello.
Yeah, my spiel when I'm meeting somebody is, if you see me out in public, you're welcome to come up and say hello. I'm never going to approach you. I just act like that person is a complete stranger, which is great with my facial blindness because I'm probably not going to be able to tell anybody anyway.
That's true.
But yeah, it's so private. And I think on one hand, it's great that it is such a place of control not control, but power to know so many intimate details about somebody's life.
Right.
And certainly there's a reason there are so many protections in place for that. Like, that's really important. But yeah, I don't think you're far off. I think that there is something so shameful about it in our culture as well that keeps some of those things kind of really isolated.
Can we take a sidebar really quick?
Okay.
I really think the YouTube thing might not be working out.
Okay.
I have a really bad itch up my fucking nose, dude. And all I can think about is those 5 subscribers.
Don't let them down, Bryce.
Okay. All right. Look away, YouTube. All 5 of you. Oh, God. Okay. That's much better.
What I'm having a hard time with the full-time video recording is that I tend to be stimming during this conversation.
Stim!
And the thing is that, well, no, I'm with you. But the thing is that usually I don't think about it. You and me are just talking, and I'm stimming away. And I don't have to think about it. And now that I know that I'm being observed
By 5 people.
by 5 people, hello to all of you. I love you each individually. I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about the stimming, and I'm thinking less about the things that we're saying. And that frustrates me a little bit. But
Yeah.
you're just going to see me stimming now. So now my leg's shaking, and I'm just going to try not to think about it and let that happen.
I love it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Just get comfy. This is our podcast, you know?
That's right. Welcome to our kitchen table with our cat in her butthole.
So I'm coming into this discussion about good v bad therapy, which is a way oversimplification of what we're talking about.
Right.
But that discussion, I'm coming in a little hot, a little angry, because of the way that you were recently treated.
Yeah.
Because I want to like reiterate and tell you and tell the folks listening that like I am very proud of your accomplishments as a therapist.
Yeah.
It's why I started a podcast. I wasn't like, man, she's a shitty therapist, but I guess we'll start talking about this publicly. I'm kind of blown away by the things that you're accomplishing, and we can look at some key metrics to show that the retention rate that you have with your clients is astronomical compared to other therapists. You have more people coming back to you and staying with you than the majority of therapists. You are seeing people who are going through 10 plus therapists throughout their life dealing with a specific issue and coming to you at their wit's end and finally finding resolution to these problems. People are coming to you, and you are helping them change their lives.
Yeah, and that's been true since I was an intern, that people would come in with 7 or 8 therapists under their belt and be like, oh, I finally found somebody. And I was like, oh no, I don't know what I'm doing. But yeah, I think
it turns out,
I think that it turns out that I do, and that I've seen a lot of success. I always had the most people respond to feedback when we sent out surveys at the college I worked at. I would like far exceed anybody else getting feedback on that, and all of it was positive. And I think that something's going well. Something's working, and I'm really glad to get to share that with other people.
Yeah. So I want to talk about what it is that you're doing that's working so well. Yeah. And I want to tell our listeners that they should be looking for these qualities in a therapist.
Yeah. You want a cat lady therapist. I think that no, I'm kidding.
Yeah. That's all that her as a therapist, she was fine, but she did like cats, and I liked that about her.
Yeah.
know?
Can't go wrong.
I just am, again, coming in a little heated because you, in my mind, were treated poorly by your personal therapist. And I want to be very careful about how we approach this discussion, because, we don't want to air people's or your personal laundry out for everyone. So what can you share with us about your more recent experience?
I feel really hesitant talking about this, really anxious talking about this. And I think it's because I feel very ashamed talking about this. And so on one hand, like, I don't want to have the conversation. I don't want to talk about it. And on the other hand, I have the privilege of also being a therapist. And I think I was much more easily able to identify when I wasn't being treated well. And I just think about all of the clients who like have no idea what's supposed to be happening or how they're supposed to feel or how their therapist is supposed to talk to them, and that they stay for a long time. Because I stayed for longer than I should have. I stayed for a good while because I kept doubting myself and going, no, it's not like that. Like it's fine. It's fine. I'm just uncomfortable because therapy's uncomfortable or whatever.
Yeah. Because you're coming to these sessions not as a therapist, but as a human.
Yeah.
Right? So you're really handing over the keys to your therapist,
In fact,
right?
that's something that I said to my therapist as I was getting started with her is, listen, I just need to be able to be a client, that I don't want to be treated like a therapist because I can't do therapy on myself.
Yeah.
I just need you to treat me like a client.
Yeah.
And I feel like she did, and it wasn't nice. It wasn't good, and it wasn't effective.
And you're coming, sharing with me kind of, I'm getting a weekly update on how this is going because, you know, for those folks who don't know, you and I kind of chat about stuff.
Right.
And we do talk about therapy. You're coming, you're telling me about what's happening, and I am like blown away at two things. First, like how poorly you're being treated, and how willing you are to accept it. You were taking it.
Yep. Well, what should have been assigned to me, and what I think other people who have experienced trauma will resonate with, or who have a protective person in their life and have experienced that, I wasn't telling you stuff. Not I wasn't telling you what I was talking about. You never pressure me to do that. And in fact, sometimes I'll share things and you're like, you don't have to tell me what you're talking about in counseling. I want to share those things with you.
Yeah.
That's open. I can always keep stuff to myself if I want to. That's fine. I wasn't telling you how she was treating me. And I think it wasn't until the end when I started, after I had ended it, I started telling you this had happened and this had happened. And we had this conversation. And
why did you feel you weren't able to tell me what was going on?
Because I knew you weren't going to like it.
Yeah.
And to me, I was like, well, maybe I am just misinterpreting, or maybe that's another neurodivergent thing, is like, I'm used to misunderstanding things. And I'm like, she's just doing her thing, and maybe I'm just not receiving it well. And I'm trying to communicate when things are a good fit and when they aren't. And I wasn't telling you because I knew that you were going to immediately be really upset about it.
I want people to hear about this experience because you're such a good therapist and this happened to you.
Yeah.
And what that says to me is that people who aren't therapists themselves may very easily be taken into a situation like this and have no idea that anything's wrong.
Sure.
You knew that something was wrong because you know better, but not everybody knows better. And that's why this is important to me to talk about. But I don't want to put you in a situation where you're uncomfortable sharing.
Yeah. No, it's okay. I guess we'll figure out when we hit that point, but yeah, we can talk about it. So do you have specific questions, or did you want me to talk about it?
If you could give us at the highest level, because I really don't want to put all of your issues out on blast, you know, or all of the things that were on your mind in these sessions. But if you could tell us some of the things that you feel that therapists got wrong. Yeah.
Okay. In this specific experience, I was going to therapy to work through some trauma. And so that's kind of what we're coming in with. Because of that, I didn't tell her right off the bat that I'm autistic. She's not a therapist who specializes in neurodivergent folks. Doesn't put that anywhere on her page or on her information. And this was also a mistake, but I was like, that's just not as relevant right off the bat. In fact, I've had another therapist in the past who I really liked, who knew that I was autistic. We had a great time talking about those things. That was good. I was like, I really just want to process through. There was a recent event that brought up old stuff, and I was like, I just want to get through
You were there with a plan, like with a specific mission.
I knew, I knew exactly the things that I was wanting to target. So a couple things that I think went wrong. Right off the bat, it felt like she knew who I was better than I did. And that's, sorry.
Oh, I'm just asking like what, or I'm just wondering like, did she say so? How was that communicated to you?
Well, she did a couple of times literally say like, oh, I just picture you doing this thing. Like I would say I did this thing. And she's like, well, that's strange. I just pictured you doing this different thing because you're like this.
What?
So for instance, she thought that I was really, and I think this is part of me being autistic, is that she thought that I was really like detail oriented. So she took that I was detail oriented, and I think she thought that I was really like type A and plan out every little bitty thing, and there's no room for adjustment in my calendar. And as much as I'm detail oriented, and as much as sometimes, especially when life feels out of control, I want to feel like I'm in control and have a plan for things, I'm pretty loose and fluid with like my day, and we change things up in our life pretty often. And even though it'll take me time to adjust to a new idea, now that we know that I'm autistic, that's the language that we use. It's like, okay, give me a couple days to think about it.
Right.
And then we implement a new thing. Totally fine. And she was like, we had people come out to spray bugs at the house or whatever. And she was like, oh yeah, that makes sense because you're like that. You're like really controlling about those things. And I was like, I wasn't even the one who set up the bug people coming out. And we live next to a cornfield. And she's like, oh, so you actually do have bug issues? I was like, yeah, that's why we have bug people come. And she's like, yeah, I know that you're just like calling people and scheduling things and doing stuff. And I was like, I don't really do that.
What the fuck is she talking about? Like, that was me. I'm the one who scheduled that.
Right. Yeah.
Sam comes out once a month. He's a good kid. We chat, you know?
Once a quarter.
Once a quarter. Mm-hmm. I give him a Gatorade. He sprays the house.
Oh, I never give him a Gatorade when I'm the only person here. I feel so bad.
Sam's getting
really taken over by me. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Poor
damn.
Sam. I'll have to give him like several Gatorades next time.
If I can confess, I don't remember his name.
Okay. Well, we'll just call him Sam.
But you tell her you're detail oriented, and then she created this whole narrative as to what that meant, right?
Yeah, so we're doing some assessments in the beginning, and in fact that'll be another issue, but we were doing some assessments in the beginning, and it was kind of dealing with a scale of have you ever been really chaotic in your life? Have you ever like essentially been manic? Is I think what this one was assessing for. And I was like, I'm the opposite of that. I've always been in control. I never as a kid like made impulsive decisions. And she took that, which was me trying to be a very good kid and be well behaved and be in an environment where I was successful when I was well behaved. She took that as, okay, I know the type. You're a planner, you do these things, you're like this, you're very controlling in your relationship. And she also, not only did she have that idea, which in the first place I don't think is helpful, as a counselor, I really have worked very hard to always shed the ideas that I have about people. That when I meet somebody and they say something and it's the same as this other person who said it, that's all you have in common. Yeah. That I might be noticing patterns in your own life, but I don't think it's helpful to have you come in and I already know who you are and what you're like. And you say one thing and I had a friend who was like that, and so you're like that friend. Not helpful.
And also the comment that you're like controlling in our relationship. I'm a fucking stallion. I'm a wild stallion running through that cornfield. Bug-infested cornfield. You cannot control me. The wind in my mane flapping gloriously. I cannot be held down or controlled. What I'm really trying to say is you're like the least controlling person I know. Like you're very laid back.
Yeah, it's less about you being a stallion and more about...
It might be a little bit about me being a stallion.
You can be a stallion.
You can't rule that out.
For the sake of the conversation, you're a stallion. So...
Thank you for giving me that.
You're welcome. So... On one hand, I think it was problematic for her to have an idea of who I was, a strong, like firm framework that she was trying to fit me into. And she was constantly trying to fit me into this framework. And when I said something outside of that, she would tend to say, but isn't it more like this? And I would say, no. And she did not like that and would start to say that basically like, well, you might not be aware that you're doing that. And it's like, okay, you've just met me. At what point are you learning about me? The other thing about this that I think was problematic, here's me being controlling. The other part of this, I see you trying to talk. The other part of this that I think was problematic is not just that she already had an idea of who I was based on almost no information.
Right.
Which is not good if your counselor's doing that to you. The second thing is that she was then set in it. There was no learning and changing course. That is, I'm giving her new information. She was correcting me on what didn't plug in to her theory about who I was.
Yeah.
And she was trying to tell me, and in therapy, the expert in the room is the client. You are the expert in your own life. Period.
Well, a few days ago, I was listening to an old episode of ours because I'm obsessed with hearing my own voice. And this was early on in the podcast and an early episode. And you said emphatically, and I wish that I wish that I had been able to play it for you kind of when you were in the middle of some of this. You said, a therapist who claims to know more about you than you do, how dare they?
I feel so strongly about that. Not only is that kind of like a thing that you learn as a therapist, that like the client's the expert in the room, but I feel like it's a thing that's said a lot.
Yeah.
It is intensely, deeply, thoroughly, entirely true that the person in front of me is the expert in their own life. And I think so much harm has been done in the field when we have said, well, these behaviors annoy me, these behaviors aren't like me, these behaviors don't contribute to a capitalistic society, these behaviors are wrong, and that's what you have to deal with. It has caused so much harm. It's caused so much harm to the neurodivergent community specifically, to Black and brown communities, to the LGBTQ plus community, anybody who doesn't fit into this little mold. And if you have a therapist who's trying to tell you who you are, not calling out patterns in your life, not saying, could this and this thing be related?
Yeah.
But you are this person and that's who you are. And this will always be an issue for you. It's wrong. It's inappropriate.
Yeah.
And that was a big mistake that I should have been more aware of. But I'm also I was so trusting and so ready to have somebody help me gain some insight into who I am that I was really willing to go like, I'm also really willing to hear that I'm the problem. Like, maybe. Oh God, probably I'm those things.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't have a planner, but maybe it's something else that I do. Maybe there are other ways that I'm hyper controlling.
Well, what's really sticking out to me is that this person was constantly trying to mold your narrative into this static image that they had of you.
And such a caricature too of like a person. People are so much more beautiful and like so much more beautiful and so much more nuanced than that. And to say you are this like person I saw on TV one time is so inappropriate. And again, you're the expert in your own life. So as a therapist, I think good therapy, if we're talking about that for a second, I'm just receiving you. And if you come along and change something about that, if you're like, I'm this sort of person, and then down the road you're like, okay, that wasn't quite right. Maybe it's more like this. Okay, cool. I'm fluid. Like, we can change. That's okay.
This therapist decided who you were almost immediately, and then based their entire plan for therapy with you off of this idea of who you were, and were unwavering in that idea as they gained new information. They kept recontextualizing it to fit this mold. And when they kept saying, well, I envision you doing this and this and this, They're not envisioning you. They're envisioning this character that they've
Right,
created.
this idea of who I am. It's so funny too because the literal opposite is happening where she's telling me I'm this sort of person who's very controlling, who's very rigid, who's all of these things.
Yeah.
And then she's steamrolling me into that. And I'm like, okay, receiving these things because I'm not that person. Inappropriate. The next thing that I think was really inappropriate in this specific situation is that we spent, a couple things right off the bat. She was always late to sessions. I don't mean like 2 or 3 minutes late. I am occasionally 2 or 3 minutes late to a session. I'll have forgotten something in the other room. My video software like won't turn on. Something will happen. If it's more than that, I'm trying to communicate. If it's more than that, I'm trying to extend our session if I have the time to.
Yeah.
Like I took 10 minutes of your time. Here's 10 minutes of my time unless I have another client.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm like, let's make up for this in some
This
other way.
one really boils me up, or boils my blood, because it is so fucking arrogant to be showing up 10, 15 minutes late to a session consistently, which is what was happening.
Yeah.
This person is charging $120 an hour for a session. More. Mm-hmm. That's $2 a minute. Mm-hmm. If you're 15 minutes late to a session, that's $30 fucking dollars.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful that you and I have careers. Mm-hmm. That doesn't change the fact that it's $2 a minute. That's a lot of fucking money. And a lot of people who really need the help can't afford that.
And
times are tough right now. And that fucking gets me riled up. Yeah. I'm sorry. It's just so disrespectful for that to happen and then for it to be brushed off as if it doesn't matter.
Yep.
No, not to mention the fact that your time's being wasted, but then you're still getting billed for the full session.
Yes. So do you want to hear how I was justifying that to myself as somebody who lets people run all over me?
Yeah.
She had been very generous and was giving me a sliding scale for that at the time because that was something that we needed. And so I felt like she was kind of taking back some of her time, and that felt almost like a fair exchange. It is not. If you and a therapist agree on a rate, that's what you're paying for the hour. You deserve the entire hour or the entire 50 minutes or whatever their time is.
Yeah.
Of course. But to me, trying to be people pleasing and all of those things, I was like, she has given me this lower rate and she's 10 to 15 minutes late. And that's maybe making up for some of that time. That's not fair. That's not allowed.
Yeah.
If your therapist is doing that to you, whether you're paying the full rate or not, like it's completely inappropriate.
And the business person in me is like, well, now you're back to the original rate.
Right.
No,
I was back to it.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. She was always late. And then she would take the first up to the half-hour mark of talking about herself. Also so inappropriate. So we learn in school that, what's it called? What's it called when a therapist shares something about themselves?
Disclosure?
Disclosure, thank you. I have had a very busy week, and when I have a really busy week, my vocabulary out the window. I don't remember anything. I've been struggling with that all week. So.
I was just really proud of myself for knowing disclosure.
I'm so proud of you.
Thanks,
Honestly,
dude.
Thank you. That's a lifesaver. Okay, disclosure. So in school, we learn about self-disclosure, and we learn that most of the time we learn that like self-disclosure is never appropriate. You should never self-disclose. Then they let you practice a little bit of like, here's one appropriate time to use self-disclosure. And we all practice that with our other student who is pretending to be a client. And we'll like self-disclose one thing. It's like, ooh, I self-disclose. Like they make it a big deal. I find that as somebody who works with neurodivergent folks, that people and humans, that people really benefit from some level of self-disclosure. It should always be for the client's benefit. It should always be something that relates to you, that amplifies the conversation, that normalizes something to you, that helps you problem solve.
Yeah.
It should never, ever be about that therapist getting something off their chest. One example where this might be different is I'm about to take time off, I'm pregnant or something, I'm dealing with something. That's not really adding to you in your life, but you might know that fact about me. I've gotten on a call before and been like, I have a cold today. I wanted to give you a heads up.
Yeah.
If I'm like sniffy and looking around, it's not that I'm not paying attention.
I mean, I've seen the same therapist for like going on 5 years or over 5 years at this point, and I only know that she has a son because she went on vacation to see her son and mentioned that she was going to see her son.
Yes.
I don't know anything about her.
Yes.
But that was the self-disclosure.
That level of personal self-disclosure, definitely okay. Otherwise, it should always amplify you. This is your time. This is your session.
Yeah.
I drive that home every time. I am never sharing things like that. When I get on and I'm saying hello, if somebody asks me directly how I am and what I've done, I will say one thing. I will say, oh, it's been a busy day. Back to you. Or I'll say, oh, the rain always makes me feel so sleepy. Does it make you feel that way? Now, am I showing up sleepy to a session? No. And that was the other thing that was happening, is not only was she showing up and talking about herself, but she was always doing poorly mentally. She was always, oh, it's been so tough. I didn't sleep at all last night. I'm just not really with it. I'm not remembering things. She would forget stuff all the time. She would mix up my paperwork with other people's paperwork.
Oh my God. Jesus.
I know, you haven't heard all of this. So
I haven't.
Your therapist should be focusing on you in session. If they're disclosing, it should be to your benefit.
To me, that looks like, yeah, both of my parents were alcoholics as well. I know how tough that can be. That's probably...
Yeah. Now I'm not getting into the personal business of this.
Right.
I'm not telling you my sob story about how my parents were this way and this thing happened. But sometimes in a really emotional moment, I might say, that really hits close to home. I know what it's like to deal with that with a sibling.
And that feels like you're just reaching out as a human at that point.
Yeah.
To just say, like, you're not alone in this feeling. I'm with you. But that is, again, not because you need to get something off your chest, but because you are doing something for their benefit.
Yeah. And I always question that back and forth if I think that particular time of sharing is going to be beneficial for this person. Sometimes people ask me direct questions about my life, and to the extent that I can, I try to be open about that. But again, we're not going into details. It's not my time. That's for me and my therapist.
What are some other things that this therapist did that you feel like you want to call out?
Yeah. We spent the whole first maybe like 6 weeks of sessions just going through assessments. And on one hand, I like the idea of and was open to the idea of doing a lot of history taking and all of that early on. We weren't really doing history taking. We were just taking assessments for like to rule stuff out. I'm not getting any direct benefit from that time. If a client's sitting there and you're having to ask questions the way that they're written on these assessments and just answering those questions, and it went so slow and we did so many of them, that was like 6 weeks of no benefit. Now, maybe it would have been a benefit if we had continued out. But as a therapist, I think it's really important that I'm delivering something useful right away.
Right.
People walk away from my intake sessions going, oh, wow, I feel like I learned something that was helpful to me. I have to do an intake. I have to have a session where I'm learning some background. But you paid for the time. It should feel like something happened during that time. Or at the very least, we're like building a connection and rapport. We're laughing about something or learning something. So it was a long time with absolutely nothing that was like helpful to me. And at the end of it, she was like, I've learned a lot. I hope that you have. And I said, I didn't feel like I got a lot out of it. I kept telling her throughout it, I'm really looking forward to this being done. I'm not getting a lot out of this.
Yeah.
And
that
she'd be like,
matter.
I am.
Yeah.
So you should feel like you're getting some benefit. That doesn't mean you're going to feel better right out of the gate. Often in therapy, you feel worse before you feel better. But you should be having some sort of communication that's helpful to you with your counselor.
I want to move this conversation on to positives.
Okay.
Ways that we can tell. But she did one other thing that fucking that outraged me.
Yeah.
I think you know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking
Are you
about. Do
comfortable
you want to say it or do you want me to say it?
No, if you're comfortable sharing, I want you to.
Okay. So I had held off on sharing that I was autistic. Like I said, I was like, I want to focus on this specific trauma and really get through it and process. Probably should have said that I was. That's on me. But when I finally...
No, it's not. No, it is not. That's not the right narrative.
Okay.
Change your own narrative.
I shared when I felt comfortable sharing.
Because you did not.
I didn't feel comfortable sharing early on. Maybe another red flag, but also you don't have to share 100% of everything right out of the gate. I truly believe in that. I'll frequently tell clients, if you don't want to go on with this, let's pause. We'll come back to it if you want. So when I finally did tell her that I was autistic, she first of all just looked at me in complete disbelief. And she said, why do you think, have you gotten an official assessment? Self-diagnosis is something that's really common in the autistic community. That doesn't mean that I saw a TikTok video and thought that I was autistic. That's not how that works. I'm saying that in general. That doesn't mean an autistic person saw a TikTok video and thinks that they're autistic. Yeah. It takes a lot of self-research and study and learning. I've spoken to so many other professionals. I am certain of this and have been for quite some time now. Yeah. In fact, I think it was a lot of the issues that she was seeing, and if we had gotten to talk about autism, she would have understood more. But her first thing was to look at me in disbelief, to shake her head, to go, why do you think, and before she could even finish that, she said, have you had an official assessment? I said no. I went to clarify that, and she goes, well, I'm referring you out for that first of all, but you're not autistic. And in fact, I have a lot of clients who tell me that they're autistic, and they're not. I know you're not autistic. And that's what everybody's afraid of having happen when you share something, is to not be believed. In fact, the biggest thing just around trauma in general, I was going to say that about being autistic, but to take it out even further, the biggest thing that people fear around trauma, around something that's sensitive and tender, is that you tell somebody and that you're not believed about it. That's the biggest thing I learned as like a victim advocate. And so my initial thought is to go like, maybe I'm wrong. And I know that I'm not wrong, but to try to think how she could be right, how she could know more about me than me, because I'm wanting to trust the professional in front of me. Yeah. And so many autistic folks, so many people who've watched these videos, so many clients that I've worked with have also been told by another professional. And here's why that information is incorrect. She is not a specialist in autism. She does not work at all with the neurodivergent community. She's not an affirming practitioner in any way around those things. And a couple of the things that she told me let me know that she doesn't know anything about the way that we're talking about autism today, and that she's wholly influenced by how we were talking about autism back in like the 80s and 90s. And one of the first things is that, well, do you have an official assessment? She didn't pause and say, how do you know that about yourself? Tell me about coming to that conclusion. Yeah. Even when I've had a client say something to me that I don't feel like my first thought is ever doubt, because that's just not how I am as a therapist. But if I have a client say something that I don't understand for them, how is that thing true? I didn't think that right out of the gate. How is that thing true? It's my job to get curious. I am not the expert in your life. I don't get to tell you that's not true for you. So my job is, when somebody tells me something like that, is to get really curious. Tell me about the process of finding out. How do you know that you're autistic? What's happened for you that's true? Well,
something I've learned from you over the years, as you've been so successful with therapy, is that it doesn't matter what the client says. You just accept it. Mm-hmm. You just accept whatever the client has to say about themselves, and it'll work itself out. It's just a place where they can say something and be heard and accepted, and you get curious about them. Yep. And that is how you cultivate an environment where you're not second guessing yourself. You're not wondering, is my whole thing wrong? Yeah. My whole belief about my system or myself wrong? You're actually able to create an environment where healing can happen.
Yep. I can't think of an example of where this would be like dangerous. Perhaps there's some example where like, some really exceptional situation where that's not helpful. But in general, what I have found to be a great way to be a therapist, a great way to be present with my clients, and the way that I can live with as a human being is that I just believe people. I just believe you. And if two things conflict, it's not my job. Something else we learn in school is confrontation. How to say, well, you said this thing was true, but then you also said this thing, and those two things are at odds. How many things in our life feel at odds with one another?
Yeah.
How many things that life, I think that in relationships, sometimes we can be both clingy and avoidant. How can both of those things be true? It is not my job to tell you that that means this thing is not true. It's my job to learn how both of those things are true for you at once.
You walked out, or you had that session with that therapist where she told you, you're not autistic. I know more about you.
0 questions.
Even though I've been consistently wrong in every assumption I've made about you, but I know more about you, and we're just going to close that door right here. You're not autistic. She like rolled her eyes and shut that door on you.
It wasn't even like a loving shutting the door.
Yeah.
It was such an unkind and
Yeah.
like, you were just incorrect about this. And she's like, I know that you're wrong.
Yeah.
Literally said.
That's what you experienced. What I experienced as your husband is you walk out of the room, because these sessions are virtual. You walk out of your room looking completely defeated, and you're wondering if she's right, because you really had put yourself in a place of vulnerability, wanting to trust this person, and you're feeling defeated. You're questioning this, and you're feeling so heartbroken that you weren't heard and you weren't supported by this person you had placed your trust in.
And really annoyed that like, I knew that was it. I knew that minute had to be done.
That you'd invested so much money and so much time in this relationship, and now you're like, now it's over.
Yeah.
And you're really looking for help.
Yeah.
Moving through some of these things that you're working through. And I have just seen you blossom so much as a person since you've been able to understand that you're autistic.
Yeah.
Your life has improved vastly in the way that you're able to be a blessing to other people who are autistic, because you're so able to accept yourself.
They're my people. Like, this is so much my community, and it has changed and expanded my life to such a degree to get to know this about myself.
Yeah.
It has made sense of so many question marks in my life. And the thing is, I can't exist outside of my own experience. I don't know what it's like to be neurotypical. So if a professional tells you you're not this thing, and you're trusting them and you're in a place of vulnerability, it's easy to go, okay, well, maybe everybody feels this way. But I know that that's not true. I know that this is where my experience lines up, and my life is profoundly better for it. But I felt so defeated.
I felt angry.
I know you did.
And sad for you.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you and commend you for being really brave to tell this. I think that it probably was also hurt your pride a little bit, the pride that you deserve, that you've earned as an excellent therapist, to realize that you've been working with such a bad therapist. But you showed up and you devoted yourself to the process, and you were willing to get uncomfortable, and those wires got crossed. That devotion to being uncomfortable and letting somebody else take the reins blurred the lines between, okay, what is a red flag and what is me just trying to work through it. Yeah. And it took getting to that point where she said, you're not autistic, for you to realize, oh, this person doesn't know what they're doing. Yeah. And that's what I want the listeners to understand, is that it can be really hard to discern.
It can be really hard to discern because, like you said, you are putting yourself in such a vulnerable and open and trusting position. And I at least have the benefit of knowing what good therapy feels like because I've been a part of it.
Yeah.
Especially, I've gotten to be a part of it as a counselor. And I know what that's like for somebody across the room to be having that, really life-changing experience. And I really wanted this to be something that was working for this situation. And it so clearly wasn't. And I feel thankful On one hand, I feel thankful to know the difference. I feel thankful that like I was really willing to have my boundaries crossed because I was really willing to be uncomfortable. I'm so glad that the autism thing happened so that it put everything else into perspective. Immediately, I was like, of course it's not okay for her to show up late. Of course it's not okay for her to then talk for half an hour about herself, to complain about herself, to want me to comfort and sympathize with her, which I would refuse to do, but she would go on. Of course it's not okay for this thing to happen. Of course, of course, of course. And it just cast a light on everything else. So on one hand, I'm thankful that I had this other perspective so that I am able to identify it for myself. And then I have you, and I'm thankful that I came out and had a safe place to land. The other thing that I'm really thankful for is that as a therapist, I've always viewed my life as this like turning inside out, of this like taking who I am and my experiences and the pain of some of those things and the difficulty there, and that in some way I'm like turning that inside out, and that's what's benefiting the clients that I see.
Yeah.
And so on the other side of this, how many clients have I had who've been told that by a therapist? How many clients have I had who've been treated poorly by a therapist, who have been not believed, who've been told something about themselves that wasn't true? And I feel in a like painful way so thankful to have had this experience in that way.
Yeah.
It's only, deepened my empathy for that sort of situation.
Because you hear about it all the time.
I hear about it
from your clients
all of the time.
Yeah, they're coming in and they're like, wow, you're the first person.
And I feel grateful that as part of self-disclosure now, I get to say like, I've been there where a therapist treated me like that. I know what that feels like, and how much you want to trust that person, and how much you want to, you were only in that position because you were trying to be vulnerable. You were doing what you should have done.
Imagine if you're sick and you go to the doctor and the doctor's like, we ran the test, you're not sick. Mm-hmm. Well, what's your immediate thought is, am I wrong?
Right.
Am I wrong? I guess I'm not sick.
I just so trust professionals. Yeah, your first thing is to question yourself and your own experiences. I think it's a rare person who doesn't do that, and that's amazing. But most people, I think, do that. And what I tell people who've been taken advantage of in an abusive situation, and what I'll get to tell people about this now is, this happened to you because you were doing the right things. Yeah. This isn't a flaw in you. This wasn't you not able to read a situation well. This was you really putting hope and faith into the situation. What a beautiful and exceptional part of you.
Yeah, the person who was at fault for this wasn't you. It was the therapist who was so wrong. And as I've said many times, I was very angry. Mm-hmm. I still feel angry. The purpose of this is to not vent, though. Right. And it's not to call someone out. It is simply to illustrate like how serious this problem is, and that it even happens to your therapist.
Yeah, that it can happen to anybody putting themselves in a vulnerable situation like that.
Because again, in a therapeutic relationship, you're not a therapist, you're a client. Mm-hmm. You're there with a therapist, and that's like, you can't be a professional in that scenario, right? Like,
and it's very intentional that I'm stripping that part of myself. And everybody's vulnerable in that position. And then that's good and beautiful and important. And I hope to, take that vulnerability to somebody else who's trustworthy with it.
Yeah. Wow. What are I think that this might turn into a two-parter.
Okay.
I think that we might talk about what a successful therapeutic relationship looks like, to really paint the contrast. What should we be looking for as clients? So I think that that's worth its own conversation.
Okay.
And we didn't get to it today, but I think that maybe our next episode will be on that.
Let's do it. Let's do a two-parter. I love that the week that I'm being really vulnerable, you're like, let's stretch it out.
No, next week is going to be great. We get to talk about all of your accomplishments.
My other favorite thing. Okay, cool. Okay, I love it. I think that this is a great thing to have a two-parter because, again, everybody listening to this has some sort of interest in therapy and in mental health. Yeah. And I think that there's not enough people talking about this. So I'd love to have that conversation with you. I'll come back prepared to do that.
Thank you again for being so vulnerable.
Yeah, thanks for always being a safe landing place for me.
This was your story to tell, and I'm grateful that you came and told it.
Yep.
Yeah, well.
Thanks.
I am, on a separate note, as we wrap up, I am immensely proud of you because you are building your private practice.
Yeah.
And that's starting to pop off.
Yeah.
You're getting booked up.
It's exciting and scary, but exciting. Scary because I've had such a fluid, flexible schedule recently, and now starting to be busier is, it's very different, but it's so good.
You're having people reach out from Europe. You're having people reach out from across the country looking to book sessions with you.
Yeah.
We're exploring how to make making you available to people in other states because counseling is limited to you're registered with North Carolina. But there are ways to make that happen through coaching. Yeah,
I might do something specifically for like neurodivergent folks in other states where I can offer some sort of assistance at least.
Yeah.
And specifically, if you're in North Carolina, like now is a great time to reach out. Things are really getting busy and it's exciting.
Well, not just North Carolina. We're gearing up to offer, or you're gearing up to offer coaching. So if you'd like to work with somebody like Ashlyn, now is the time to reach out because like your dance card's filling up really fucking fast. Fast. It's nuts.
It's good.
Yeah. But I'm proud of you and I'm excited for you with that. Let's, again, I want to remind everybody we're on YouTube now. If we could get that 5 subscribers to, 6 subscribers, that would be a pretty big deal.
That's maybe our goal for the week.
I've updated you every subscriber. I've been like, babe, we got another subscriber.
I'm just as excited every subscriber.
It's so funny. Ashlyn, if we want to learn more about you, where can we find you?
You can find the podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at I Married Your Therapist. You can find me on Instagram at therapy with _Ash. You nodding your head is making me feel like I'm going to forget something.
No, you're doing great.
Or you can email us if you have a question for the podcast. You can email us at imarriedyourtherapist@gmail.com.
And I'd encourage you to do that. We're reading it. We'll see it. We'll respond to it live in the podcast. It'll happen.
This is the time. I'm really excited to get to answer some questions and talk more about the things that people feel useful. It would be useful to them.
Well, Ashlyn, as always, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your time, Price.
And we'll see you next time on I Married Your Therapist. Did you know that somebody said they listened to 16 episodes in 2 days?
That's amazing.
16 hours of the two of us talking.
That's almost as...
It's a lot, right? It's a lot to think about.
So many hours. I'm just like so honored by that. It just feels incredible to think of somebody having done that. And the other feedback that we've gotten from people listening is just like, it blows my mind. Yeah, I thought the only person who wanted to hear us talk like that is cats.